welcome to another edition of Drugs, Crimes, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. I'm your host, Buford C. Terrell. With me tonight is my co-host, Bandu Nair, and we have a shortened program tonight and have adopted a slightly different format. Bandu is going to bring us up to date on some legislative happening in Congress, and then we've invited an old friend of the show and of the Drug Policy Forum, Jerry Epstein, in, and we're going to discuss a couple of news stories that have been circulating lately about strawberry-flavored methamphetamine and cheese. It may sound like a recipe for dessert, but I think there's a little more to it than that. So first, Bandu, what's happening on Capitol Hill?
Thanks, Buford. As in many years past, the Hinchy-Rohrabacher is coming up for a vote, and last year in June, the House of Representatives voted 163 to 259 in favor of the Hinchy-Rohrabacher Amendment, which is an amendment to a federal bill restricting federal funding to go to any type of enforcement or DEA, FBI, SWAT in order to prosecute any type or task force any type of medical marijuana patients or dispensaries in states that have already legalized medical marijuana. And so far we have 12, with 2 other states still trying. So this number of people, U.S. House of Representatives who have supported it has only increased year after year after year. And this year we need even more of your support. We have a more Democratic Congress, so hopefully we can get those numbers even more up. Whatever policy disagreements that exist between the states and the federal government, medical marijuana patients and those who are ill and suffering should not have to bear the burden of this policy debate. So there is a website that you can visit, www.action.mpp.org, if you'd like to learn more about this, or if you'd like to write a letter to your congressperson, and you can find out also how they voted on this issue last year to either thank them or write them again to support it this year. Those of you who went out to support HB 1534 in Texas House, please, we need that same fervor, we need that same momentum in order to get the Hinchy-Rohrabacher passed again.
I understand that the House committee that's looking at this bill and medical marijuana in general is chaired by Representative Dennis Kucinich, who has publicly stated that he intends to get something done about medical marijuana this session. So
right. At
least on the House side, things are looking pretty bright right now.
It is. It couldn't be in a better position with Dennis Kucinich chairing that committee, but there's still a lot of opposition, and so we still need a lot of people to...
Also, we have a very different situation on the local level in terms of the chair dealing with the medical marijuana legislation for Texas, in which Representative Diane DeLisi has refused to allow a hearing of the bill.
Right.
Even though we have some pretty good indications that the committee as a whole favors the bill, she will not allow the committee to hear it. This in turn means, of course, that the bill will not come to a vote before the entire House, where once again we have some reasonable indications that for the first time this bill might pass. The particular bill in Texas is only about allowing a person who uses medical marijuana and happens to be arrested to explain to a jury that why they are using it, and with a doctor's recommendation perhaps, let the jury decide whether they want to convict or not. Representative DeLisi is not allowing this bill to be heard, and it strikes me that most people will feel that it is pretty unfair for one person to stop a bill from even being heard, especially for something so mild as to allow a jury to decide the facts.
Yes, and
essentially it's changing no criminal policy whatsoever. Texans for Medical Marijuana, which has been the spearhead of this campaign, they're trying to find any loophole whatsoever that they can to attach this bill to another bill, making an amendment somehow.
There are so few days left in the session that it's probably dead for this biennium, but it's certainly not too late to let Representative DeLisi of Temple, Texas, know how you feel about her very high-handed actions of substituting her own somewhat misinformed personal judgments for those of the people of Texas. Okay, let's turn to the news. And there have been two stories that have been circulating around the country for the past, month or so. The first of them centers in Dallas, where there apparently has been a new drug cutting a swathe through the Dallas teenagers. This drug is called cheese, and it seems to be a mixture of heroin and Tylenol PM. I believe we have a caller before we get to cheese, though. Hello, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Buford. Good to hear your voice. I had a couple of things I wanted to share with your audience this week.
Okay, Dean. This is our friend Dean Becker of radio fame. So go ahead, Dean.
Well, thank you. Buford, a few things I wanted to point out that our good friend Terry Nelson, who does reports for us on the radio, does a weekly report for law enforcement against prohibition. Well, after 32 years serving the U.S. government as a Customs, Border, and Air Interdiction officer, he signed on again. He's now working for the State Department. He's headed to Iraq. He's going to be helping the Iraqis develop better border control. And as much as I hate that war, I got to respect the man for doing what he's doing.
Okay. Yeah, and they have a bad border problem there.
Well, they do. So perhaps Terry has the acumen to give him some help. Also wanted to point out that I've been working on videos, as you well know. I think here in a couple of weeks you guys are going to carry the 1 hour Are We Winning the War on Drugs panel.
Yeah, I believe that's right on the 30th, I think it is.
So, yeah, with that features Stand First, high-intensity drug trafficking area, long-term Office of National Drug Control Policy Officer, as well as Marcia Baker, the director of the Phoenix House Treatment Center, and yours truly. I think the audience will really enjoy that. I've been also working on some other videos for release on YouTube and hopefully to air on Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Got some stuff from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy Convention featuring Howard Wooldridge of LEAP and Mike Gray talking about the beginnings of drug prohibition, how it's always been a sham. A discussion with Rick Doblin from the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Also was in Washington, D.C. attending the National African American Drug Policy Coalition Convention. Have some interviews I did with Deborah Peterson Small of Break the Chains, as well as the director of NAACP, Judge Arthur Burnett, and the former mayor of Baltimore, Kurt Schmoke. Also at the SSDP event, captured a panel on Plan Colombia and featuring Sanho Tree, the Institute for Policy Studies, telling about what a horrible situation that is down there. Also attended the methamphetamine conference in Salt Lake City, and I captured an interview with Lynn Paltrow, Advocates for Pregnant Women, and she, debunks the meth hysteria, meth babies and all that.
And, you know, from what I've heard coming out of that meth conference, it really seemed like it was just an utter joke with the kind of propaganda that was being thrown around.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There is... And again, I fess up. I was a methamphetamine addict for years. And once I learned that my first son was going to be born, I just quit.
Yeah.
Didn't need to go to prison, didn't need to go to treatment, didn't need any outside influence in order to stop. Let's see. I was also going to let your listeners know that I'll be preaching this coming Sunday in Galveston. I will be at the Fellowship Church, which is at 502 Church Street in Galveston, 5th Street, and church and services start at 10:30 a.m. I'll be giving an introductory speech from Professor William Martin, summarizing an editorial he had published in the Houston Chronicle, and then I'll be giving my sermon, Fear Could Make the Drug War Last Forever. And if folks want to learn more about the Drug Truth Network, which is what keeps me occupied pretty much 24/7, they can go to my website, which is drugtruth.org. truth, TRUTH.net. And they can listen weekly, 8 times a week on KPFT radio. Each afternoon at 4:20 p.m. we do the 420 Drug War News. On Fridays at 1 o'clock we do the Century of Lies show. And at 7 p.m. on Fridays we do the Cultural Baggage show. The drug war is a scam. I think we've proven it time and time again. We just need to embolden people to step up and demand a change.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Several things Dean raised there that I'd like to comment on for just a second, Buford. Number one, Dean talked about his own meth addiction and conquering that. Recent item in the news, former heroin addict, age 20, was just elected mayor of a California city.
Right.
And just to confirm to anyone who has any doubt about it, if we can bring people into recovery, they're perfectly capable of being contributing citizens.
Well,
and we need to work toward that.
I think that brings me to the other story I wanted to put on the table. And this is the one about the supposed new appearance of strawberry-flavored meth in the marketplace. We've been hearing a lot of hysteria about meth lately. And frankly, it's the same old amphetamine that's been around for 70 years now. And the government's own statistics show that there are, according to the government, 600 to 900,000 meth users total in this country. And that's less than 0.3% of the population. This is not much to get hysterical about. And it's also a drug that, while it causes some behavioral problems, is one that people seem to be able to wean themselves away from fairly easily through therapy. Let's see what our caller has to say. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Thank you. Excluding drugs and crime, how would y'all say the coverage of politics is these days in our state or in any or even all? Do any of y'all catch any of what's going on in our state on the internet, because that's the only way you can get it? Or maybe even TXEN, 24 is gone, and maybe even WTP TV. KPFT is of a different blood. Cover the whole gamut, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think covering, drugs, crime, and politics for this show are not 3 separate topics.
Right.
They are the combination of those 3 topics. So to the extent that there's political coverage of drug policy and its impact on crime, unless you want to talk about the fact that we have almost daily coverage of prohibition-caused crime and violence in the political situation in Mexico almost every day on our borders, there has also been a great deal of political dispute about how to deal with the upcoming problem in Afghanistan, where once again prohibition and the problems of the poppy crop and how we deal with opium there is creating a great deal of dissent, all of which is going to net out to a great deal of risk to our troops there and people who may be killed because they're interfering with a crop that's essential to the survival of an awful large number of poorly paid people who are trying to keep their kids alive over there. There are legitimate ways to purchase that crop, and that's been suggested to a number of political people. But political coverage locally in this state as to positions influencing drug policy in the state have, to my mind, been relatively poor and scant and scarce, but that's largely because they don't have a great deal to cover.
Right. I'm a firm believer in the old print media, that you basically can't keep up with what's going on without the New York Times, the Washington Post. Here in Texas, we're pretty well stuck with the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News, the Austin American Statesman. And in fairness, I have to give the Chronicle at least a B plus, maybe an A minus on a rather balanced coverage of drug issues. Now, the problem is newspaper reporters work in a hurry, they work under deadline, and they have no historical sense. So when we hear about the border problems, we don't see this as an ongoing 40-year-long battle. This war on the border goes back at least to the 1970s, and you could argue it goes back even as far as Pancho Villa and the raids on Columbus.
Exactly.
So newspapers have to be supplemented. A lot of the old-fashioned print magazines, Atlantic, Harper's, Texas Monthly sometimes, Texas Observer, fill in. And, of course, you can't live without the Internet. I tend not to look at many of the political sites on the Internet. I blog myself, but I don't pay much attention to bloggers. I'm much more into discussion groups talking about other people involved in the issues. Where do you look?
I look all over, from blog spots to, I like to, especially just Google News is a very fast and quick way. Drugsense.org is a very concise drug policy reform update. But going back to print media, something I mentioned to Jerry earlier, going back to our main topic, when I was scanning through headlines, the only newspapers that had mentioned anything about a meth problem were those from very rural areas, from not only very rural areas, but very rurally states. Not only that, but as far as strawberry, the candy flavored meth, it was like, oh, this is a rampant problem. But it had only been reported in 1 or 2 states.
Yeah, and these have been in the West primarily. And I think this is one of the things about these stories is that from a handful of occurrences in a few locations, it's become a nationwide hysteria. And as I started looking at the stories written on it, what we get is one paragraph that says, strawberry-flavored meth has turned up in these places. And in the next paragraph, with no supporting evidence, no evidence of any sales, no statements by dealers, no examples of any children caught using it, we immediately get a whole string of law enforcement officials saying, this is obviously a plot on the part of drug dealers to ensnare young people.
Some people will say that, yes. Absolutely.
It's amazing the number of times that this shows up in the news reports.
Let me try and address an intersection of all of these things. One of the things I do for news is I am on a government-sponsored discussion list, particularly about methamphetamine, which involves law enforcement officers across the country and also people who are forensic scientists, but a group of people who are concerned with the treatment of the meth problem and dealing with the meth problem. And it includes a number of former meth addicts. So it's sort of interesting to get that perspective. But there are several things that have struck me about the information on the list. First of all, I've given them the information about the size of the meth problem as reported by the government statisticians.
Right.
And they are astounded to find out that the numbers are so small.
Right.
And they are skeptical until other people will call into the list and say, yes, they checked the numbers, and it really does say that. Yeah. And so a second thing is, there is such an obsession with the anecdote, such as the strawberry meth, that it impedes any discussions. And since the list is run essentially with the administration in the standard view, there's no real political discussion about the political choices that are being made between the law enforcement people and the treatment people, and why there's inadequate funding for treatment, why there's inadequate mental health care, and why we have so many police doing so much to do so little. To accomplish, they eat up the money, but there's no statistical indication that any variance in the amount spent on law enforcement has any real impact on the problem. Although there are some specific instances when people may become violent, may break the law, an anecdote that absolutely requires police attention. but there's very little attention or understanding of the dimensions of the problem. And I'm working on that, and I'll do that again some more tonight, and we'll try to educate drop by drop by drop people around the country.
And I think this is one of the problems that I find, is that the people who should be working on solutions are, and I hate to say it, but they're horribly ignorant about the issue.
Yes.
And here I'm including police officers and administrators, I'm including school teachers and superintendents, and I'm especially including politicians. But there was a rather pathetic instance that came to light this last week of a police officer who had been doing drug work for several years, calling a 911 hotline, thinking he was dying because he felt funny after eating a part of a brownie that he and his wife had cooked using 1/4 of an ounce of marijuana. Okay. Now, he was high at the time he made the call, but even so, as a policeman working with drugs over time, someone should have taught him that marijuana doesn't kill people.
Well, at least not in the recorded history of mankind due to a toxic overdose.
Yeah. They believe that. They have to believe that this is a horrible drug, and in fact, I think he had said that he had tried it once before, though, so that's not in his favor.
Mm-hmm. And once again, though, these things have implications for policy if we're going around frightening parents.
Right.
That they don't know that 97, 98% of their kids are not interested in these drugs or using these drugs. They have the impression that 97 or 98% of the kids are using drugs when they're in fact not using drugs. And so there's this overreaction that the kids then recognize as not really being based on facts or education and what surrounds them. And there's a barrier to effective communication between parents and children and the enforcement community that stops effective education.
One thing that we have all heard is that meth is a horrible drug. Use it once and you're automatically addicted. Same thing we heard about crack cocaine in the 80s. Yet, any parent that wants to go and look at the 2 surveys the federal government has sponsored for 30 years, the Profiling the Future through the University of Michigan, I believe it is, and the SAMHSA Household Drug Survey, sees that that's simply not true. If they compare the ratio of people that have ever used the drug with those that have used within the past month, there's consistently about a 1 to 10 or 1 to 15 ratio. I mean, it's a scare story that's out there, and the facts don't support it.
This is just a tiny thing that came to my mind. The director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA, Nora Volkow, and she's a good scientist, and she, among the things that she commented on 6 months or so ago was the fact that cocaine users tended to take about 2 years to become addicted. Okay? I've never seen that printed in the newspaper anywhere.
I've never seen that in the newspaper, and really I haven't seen it in the research.
Exactly. Okay, so the point is that there's a lot of information out there, but if it's that type of thing, it doesn't generate fear, it doesn't generate magazine sales, it doesn't generate news sales.
Right.
But strawberry meth being peddled to kids, which we're not sure has ever happened anywhere, okay, but may have, in a few cases, it gets all the attention. So we can't focus on the real problem.
The root of the problem being, actual education, actual eradication of these drugs. But it's, there actually was one incidented strawberry meth. It may have just been pink colored, but anyways, I just saw that this morning. But it's getting the fear out of it and getting to the root of the problem.
Well, one of the things that I've been looking at, and this dates back at least to the Harrison Act of 1914, is that we have focused on drugs as being either good or bad, instead of looking at users that may have problems with drugs.
Exactly.
And to focus on this, let's look at the cheese. The thing that raised my suspicion when I heard about it was how very little heroin was in the cheese. The idea was that here was a way to mix the heroin up to get it down with just a little bitty bit, and they were saying like 2 milligrams per package, so that you could sell it for $2 a package. Okay, 2 milligrams of heroin is not going to get anybody high and is not going to kill anyone. But then I got to looking, and what I found out is that the heroin is mixed with Tylenol PM. One of the active ingredients in the Tylenol PM is diphenhydramine. Most of us know that as Benadryl. If you look at the Benadryl side effects, they include sleepiness, dizziness, disturbed coordination, confusion, excitation, euphoria, blurred vision, vertigo. In other words, all of the things of a typical trip. It does have additive effects when used with CNS depressants like heroin. And if we look a little further and look at the warnings, in children, overdose may cause hallucination, convulsions, or deaths.
Yeah, well,
so here we've got a chance where probably, just like they've done for years with Robitussin with DXM in it, kids are tripping on the Tylenol PM. It's got a little heroin added to give it more kick.
Which it does.
Yet, because Benadryl is safe and we know it's a good drug, we don't look at it, we get scared on the heroin that's
been added to
that's really not there. So
yeah. Well, dosage means everything too, doesn't it?
Dosage means a lot, yeah.
I mean, obviously, we can take any of these drugs, and we reach some point when we're going to get a dose response that is going to be fatal, actually, with most of these drugs, if you take enough of it, including alcohol.
If you look at water.
Yeah, exactly.
The fatal dosage of water is only about 3 or 4 times what we need every day to live on. We've only got about a minute and a half left.
Oh, my goodness, we just flew through this
We've just barely gotten warmed up, but last comments from either of you?
Well, only that the Lancet, very respected medical journal, has put out a long ranking of drugs by danger, and one of the components of that ranking was to say which drug confuses the mind and creates the most distorted information, which is intoxication, and the drug, alcohol.
Right.
So let's try to bring our policies into some consistency with the reality.
Right. Don't believe everything that you read, but do ask your congressperson about Hinchy Rohrabacher.
50 years ago, when I was in high school, the drugs of abuse, alcohol and tobacco, those are still the ones that are the problems. To prevent drug problems with your kids, watch the kids. Behavioral problems show up years before the kids start playing with drugs.
My last comment, if we can have a commission on the Iraq War, we certainly need a commission on the mistakes being made in the drug war.
Okay. And maybe it will do as good a job as the one we had in the 1970s on marijuana, which the President and the Congress managed to totally ignore.
On the other hand, maybe it will actually do something.
It might. And we're just about to run out of time here. I thank you both for being here. We were going good enough. I wish we had our other half hour for it. But for the rest of you, keep your employees in politics informed. And we ran over.